Welcome to the Pellegrino Taylor and Martin Steve show, Capitals Uncovered, where we talk about geopolitics with brilliant guests from around the world. And today we're going to talk about dear old Blighty, where I've just got back from, because there's been government change, and some of us are praying or hoping the most resolute opponent of Russia and peace in the East will actually change his mind with a new prime minister who's mastered social media, namely Andy Burnham, and who's said very little about Ukraine so far, and talks about cost of living issues and talks about helping the homeless, helping uh, the common people with their cost of living. I think they've capped bus prices at £2. With all those things, is there room, political space, political room for devoting vast amounts of energy on Ukraine as Keir Starmer did, or will it be the same old, same old? At the same time, we're seeing escalations with the Ukrainians firing at Iranian oil tankers, perhaps in the hope of bringing the two conflicts together. And of course, that does leave us with the possibility of Russia and America confronting each other directly. At the moment, they have their two separate wars, and of course, that's something in Ukraine's interests. FInian Cunningham, you are an expert on Russia, an expert on geopolitics. We'll put your links down below. What is your estimate? And you're, of course, based in the United Kingdom, so you have a close eye on what the Brits are doing. What's your take on these things I've just discussed?
Well, Pilly and Martin, good day to you both, and nice to see you again. I think Burnham's going to lead to a very dangerous escalation. I mean, he was put in place to do what Starmer kind of was hesitant to do, and that is to ramp up the military spending with NATO to confront Russia. Starmer wasn't averse to increasing military aid to NATO whatsoever, but he was just not as gung-ho as the British establishment wanted. They wanted tens of billions more uh, spending on the military at the expense of public services. Now, Starmer was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. He couldn't really cave in to the demands because it's going to put a lot of pressure on public services. But Andy Burnham comes along and he's very open to, as he says, not being squeamish about cutting public services to boost military spending. So he's been put in place to do that very job. I mean, the guy who tipped Starmer's fate was John Healey, who was the Minister of Defence, or the Defence Secretary in Britain, as it's called. Now, he resigned in June, and that really, blew Starmer's credibility. That undermined his authority fatally. He was under a lot of pressure from other directions, but Healey's treacherous resignation from the Ministry of Defence in June tipped Stormer's premiership, and that ended it. And Andy Burnham comes along very neatly, and then has a rapid rise to the 10 Downing Street. I mean, it's just kind of like amazing how he became an MP in Makerfield in June, a few days after Healey resigns, treacherously undermining Stormer, and then the next thing he's catapulted into Downing Street. Now, the thing about Burnham, unlike Stormer, he is willing to boost the military spending. I mean, he made then John Healey, who was formerly the defence minister under Stormer, he's now made him the Chancellor of the Exchequer, probably the most powerful position in Britain, along with the Prime Minister, if probably more so than the Prime Minister. So we've got the military agenda in place now, with Stormer being ejected from Downing Street, Burnham brought in, and very willing to go along with this militarism, this military agenda to support Ukraine. He's already declared that he will be 100% behind Ukraine, and will kind of ramp up the military support to that war. Sorry to go on, guys, to hog this point of the conversation, but it's very important to note that just in the last day, the new defence secretary in Britain, a guy called Wes Streeting, he's now in talks with Pete Hegseth to help supply military naval support to open up the Straits of Hormuz. So, I mean, I think the Brits, this new cabinet in London is going to be a lot more proactive, gung ho than the hapless wimpish Starmer was. And I fear that we're going to see an escalation both in Ukraine and in Iran. And in fact, the two wars are coming together with Ukraine attacking Iranian ships in the Caspian Sea. So it's a very, very worrying time, I think.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, okay, I hope you're not right, but I think you know more than I do about UK politics. But I was thinking, um, Ed Miliband, I think he stopped the attacks on, stopped the possibility of an attack on Syria back in 2013. He didn't believe the Assad must go rhetoric, and he's an object of suspicion for the British deep state. Is his positioning in the foreign secretary a parking place for him where he can do the least damage? And a sort of sop to the leftists and the doves in the Labour Party, but he won't actually have any real power over US UK foreign policy. Because I actually thought, well, maybe that's going to betoken a new approach from the Brits, more dialogue and less war. But what do you think?
Well, I would hope that perhaps it is. Oh, it is a kind of a good sign, but as you sort of suggest, but I don't think so, Pele. I think Ed Miliband will be just a Liam position, traveling around a lot, gathering up his travel miles, but will not actually be in control of the policy. He'll be just a kind of a token figure to the sort of more left wing of the anti-war sort of constituency in the Labour Party. The main man here is going to be John Healey, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the finance minister, and he's going to control all the budgets and, in particular, funnel a lot more money into the military support for NATO and really the war in Ukraine and elsewhere. I think Ed Miliband's position is really a lame position that will not bring any real, decisive effect on policy.
And what
I don't
about,
know.
I mean, start about Streeting? He doesn't know have any experience of defense. I mean, people
Well,
joke. So
yeah.
people are saying the defense ministry or the defense hawks are saying behind the scenes that, oh, well, it's not the guy he wanted to prosecute our war against Russia. But on the other hand, what's the other argument that he is
Well,
able to sell the war to the British people because he's quite a good talker?
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think his is again a bit of a sort of a minor position. Really, he will be just kind of a yes man to the main setter of the policy, which will be people like Healy, who's reflect John Healy, the chancellor, who's going to work for the deep state, the imperialist state. I mean, Wes Streeting, if you remember, he also delivered a fatal blow to Stormer's authors, authority because he resigned in May as the health minister in Stormer's cabinet. And that really did do a lot of damage to Stormer's authority. And a few weeks later, Healy delivered the coup de grace by resigning as the Minister of Defence. Now, so West Streeting, then when Burnham got his, election in Makerfield, the North of England constituency, which then made him viable to contest the Labour party's leadership, to take the prime minister's spot. West Streeting was put forward as a potential rival, in a contest, in a party contest. And very, very strangely, he stood aside. He said, no, I'm not going to contest this leadership battle. And that gave Burnham a straight path, a rapid straight path to take the premiership. So West Streeting, did a huge favour for Burnham in that he facilitated this rapid path to Downing Street. Now, I just think that his appointment now in Burnham's cabinet as the Minister of Defence is a payoff, is a kind of a reward for doing the needful of letting him have a free run to become the Prime Minister. So he's put in now as the Minister of Defence, and I think it's a bit of a strange appointment. He was the Health Minister in one cabinet, and then a few weeks later he's the Minister of War to destroy lives. I mean, that seems a bit of a contradiction, but I think it's it's a bit absurd. But I think that the point is he's just giving a bit of a payoff reward, and it's not going to affect. He's not going to have any effect on the policy. He's more just a yes man, as Miliband will find himself also as the Foreign Secretary. This policy of militarism and war is being set by other people like John Healey. Well, he's just really serving the establishment, but that's where the power is going to come from. That's where the policy will come from.
I'll say one more thing before I hand over to Martin. Um, But I mean, British military is a joke, isn't it? So I mean, even if they do spend up to 3%, it'll take a very long time. Apparently, well, they got four nuclear submarines with nuclear weapons on them, but apparently they're all in for reparations right now. They got two aircraft carriers who only hit the news when they malfunction or they hit have a minor crash or something. Britain has,
Mm,
I don't know, t one armored division it can field, if that. So, I mean, my running theory was that the British intelligence services and their capacity for propaganda and annoying people and annoying the Russians and their special forces and all those, they're far more powerful, dangerously, than the UK's true military capacity. So, the whole British modus operandi was to create provocations and then let the Americans take over and do stuff. So, where,
mm.
I mean, where does this leave Britain's military capacity? Are they going to be able to arm for war, or are they only, I'm going to be contrarian here, arming for reasonable defense after decades of being underarmed?
Mm. Well, I'm not really in a position to sort of say what all this extra money will do to improve the British military forces, but I think it's just the signifier of a militarist willingness to go along with the militarist agenda, the war agenda. Now, will it actually improve the military forces of the very kind of diminished British military forces? That's another question, I think, or I can't answer that. But I think for me, the willingness to spend more money, much more money now under Burnham with John Healey, spells a more proactive or more gung ho policy out of Downing Street to comply with the American agenda, the Israeli agenda, to escalate against Russia and Iran. And Wes Streeting, this new sort of health secretary, stroke defense secretary, just gave an interview to the BBC that's put out today, where he's saying that he's in now communication with Pete Hegseth to talk about coming together and forming a naval operation in the Straits of Hormuz to open it up to help the Americans in their quagmire. So I think we've got a much more willing, British butler to serve the American senior partner here.
Starmer famously didn't want to get involved, and that was probably his most popular moment with the British public. Marty, what's
Yeah,
your
and
thoughts? Yeah.
and also
Uh,
sorry to cut in, Marty, but I must add, like within days of Burnham being made this prime minister, the US B-1 nuclear capable long range bombers have been taking off from British bases that Stormer,
yes.
had declined to do, for various kind of awkward political reasons, not moral reasons, but he couldn't go along with that. That facility, but Burnham has no qualms. I mean, he's now opened up this Fairford RAF base in Gloucestershire for the B-1 bombers to take off and to hit Iran. Iran has now said, Britain is a legitimate target. One would argue that's quite of a logical response, given that Britain is facilitating these B-1 bombers down to attack Iran. Now, this is again another indication that Burnham's cabinet is going to be much more, war hawkish, warmongering, and servile to the US and Israeli, the Zionist war agenda.
Marty.
If I may. Uh, 98% agreement with you, Finian. I wish it was zero disagreement because your assessment is, as usual, brilliant, clear, unrelenting, and totally convincing. But there's going to be a distraction in the Middle East, and Miliband is part of this. And that is, there's also domestic politics in Britain. And Israel is hugely unpopular with the British public. It's especially unpopular with the large Muslim minority population in Britain, which is now crucial to Labour's success in any election. The Muslim communities in Britain, especially in the old industrial communities of the north of England, have reached critical mass. And Burnham knows this more than anyone else because 20% of the population of the city of Manchester, which he was a highly successful and popular mayor of in the last over the past most of the past decade, is Muslim. Manchester proper has a population of 605,000. The Muslim population within Manchester is 123,000. How does that fit into these politics? First of all, I fully agree with you, and I wish I didn't, on this new hawkish government. It's going to be exactly the way you said. It's going to be a catastrophe. Streeting is the ideal defense secretary for the deep state and for Andy Burnham, precisely because he is totally piss ignorant of all defense issues. We see the same thing with presidents in the United States, like Joe Biden, who wasn't even a cognitive human being during the time he was supposedly the most powerful man in the world. We saw it with George W. Bush Jr., who, unlike his father, is a moron and therefore was a perfect president for the deep state. They could also work very happily with Barack Obama after they intimidated him. Obama was rather similar to Ed Miliband, a man whose personal instincts were anti-war and decent, but who could be easily threatened and intimidated into neutralism. And that's exactly what we see. What are we going to see with Miliband? He will be an activist foreign secretary, but only in key areas. He will be allowed to talk all the nonsense he wants to on climate change and zero carbon and all the mythical non-scientific nonsense on that. He will be the most idiotic and influential and respected foreign secretary on those issues since Arthur Henderson pushed unilateral disarmament in the face of the rise of Adolf Hitler in the 1930s. Arthur Henderson was a total idiot. And on foreign issues, as well as on economics and on science, so is Ed Miliband. He's not been let near real power, as you said. He is going to run around the world exactly as you said, but he's going to do something else. Ed Miliband is Jewish, and he's quite anti-Israel. And the Zionist movement in Britain loathes Miliband and fears him. And there's just been a highly critical article of him in the generally centrist and moderate and highly responsible Times of Israel outlet in Israel. And even they are saying, we must be afraid of Ed Miliband because he's so hostile to Zionism and he's so hostile to Israel. So what are we going to see? On Israel and Iran, Ed Miliband will be allowed to sound moderate. And this is safe because in Washington, the British have no power at all on the Middle East, none whatsoever. None. The Israelis have far more power in escalating the war with Iran. Britain has no influence regarding Iran at all. All the British are desperately eager to do, as you have pointed out, is to be able to play Tonto to the Lone Ranger. And the former chief military political advisor to Margaret Thatcher 20 years ago told me that that was the grand strategy of Britain. You rightly smiled when I said it, a 1950s infantile TV Western show. And yet, the top advisor to Margaret Thatcher, the most consequential British Prime Minister in the past 80 years, told me that the grand strategy of Britain boils down to being Tonto to the Lone Ranger. And they believe it, not exactly, but they believe it, and it's real. So they want to run on Trump's side in the Middle East. This means, first of all, that on the Middle East, they will support Trump's most militaristic aspects, but Ed Miliband will pretend, well, he'll be sincere, but he'll be powerless. Ed Miliband will preach, how he condemned the war in Gaza, he condemned the killing in Gaza. He was sincere about that. He's been critical of Netanyahu. The British community the Jewish community in Britain has its knickers tied in knots, not over Netanyahu destroying democracy in Israel or provoking world war and anti-Semitic reactions around the world. No, of course they don't care about that whatsoever. What they care about that is that Ed Miliband, who has a Jewish background himself, his parents were Polish Jews who escaped Hitler to Britain in the nick of time in 1940, and good luck to them. But they hate Ed Miliband for saying responsible, restrained, decent things in the Middle East. But why is this being permitted? It's being permitted because Labour needs Muslim support in Britain. And the Israeli cause is dead in Britain because of the slaughter in Gaza. So Miliband will say the right things about this. Being a decent human being personally, which he is, he will even try personally to restrain Netanyahu. But of course, that will get nowhere because the Israelis are not dependent on Britain whatsoever. They don't control Britain, but they have huge influence in America, which is a different story. Huge influence. And we're going to see that on Tuesday because Mr. Netanyahu, of course, is going to meet Mr. Trump tomorrow as we speak. Well, we're taping this show on Monday. By the time it comes out, the meeting will be there. Now, I make a prediction that whatever the expectation, even among liberal Israelis critical of Netanyahu, is that Trump may be somewhat critical of Netanyahu. I don't believe that for a minute. I have a much darker prediction, and nobody has said this before. I think whenever Trump and Netanyahu get together, they form a third person. I had a best friend at school in Belfast. I won't use his second name. I don't want to get him undue attention. I still think very highly of him. And also, he's a formidable fellow, not a man to cross from the hardline Protestant community. And you know what that means, Finian, right? But my friend Eric and I were both quiet, law-abiding kids separately. But as teenagers, whenever we got together, we cooked up hellfire for all around the school against our targeted teachers. And a mutual friend of ours said that whenever we got together, we became a third person. We egged each other on to do things we both had the brains, but neither of us had the nerve to do separately. That's Trump and Netanyahu. You see it. When they get together, Netanyahu knows how to press Trump's buttons. And you've just pointed this out again. This Hegseth-Streeter relationship is going to be catastrophic. Because on the one hand, there's a schizophrenia here, which is real in British policies and very sinister. On the Middle East, they'll do what they can, and Miliband will be sincere about it, and so will Burnham, to try and rein in the Israelis, because they both have distaste for the Israelis. They both loathe what genuinely, as human beings, what has been done in Gaza. But more important than either of those things, it's necessary politics for them because they need the Muslim vote to come back to them from the Green Party. That is crucial to them. But does that translate into peace in the world? No, it does not. It doesn't even translate into peace against Iran. Because the two key British policies are, first of all, the dream that the resources of Ukraine will be theirs under the 100-year treaty. And they, as you and Pele have rightly pointed out, and we all three of us repeatedly point out, of course, and nobody else almost does, the British are much more hawkish than the Americans in provoking Russia and trying to disintegrate Russia and rebuild the Nazi fascist gangster regime that practices so much human trafficking and drug dealing that operates out of Kyiv. And this is going to happen more strongly than ever. And now when you have an innocent like Streeting, who doesn't know a Kalashnikov from an Uzi, and doesn't have a clue on anything in tactical systems. He probably thinks a B-2 is a Boeing 707. I mean, these people are technologically and militarily totally illiterate. And the more illiterate and ignorant they are, the more suitable it is for both the American hawks and the hawks in the British deep state. Therefore, Wes Streeting is the perfect defense secretary for both Andy Burnham and for the Americans. On Ukraine, they're going to be more hawkish and dangerous than ever. You said one key point on this, just to re-emphasize. You said it yourself. B-2s operating from Gloucestershire against strategic targets in Iran.
B1, I saw.
Sorry, B1s. Thank you. Yes, which of course are not a stealth.
Let Finian talk because we've got a few more minutes.
For 30 years.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with Martin there that I think there's a lot of public relations going on here and cosmetic changes with Ed Miliband in as the foreign secretary to give a little bit of lip service towards, criticizing Israel to placate the huge, intensely strong anti-Zionist feeling and condemnation of Israeli genocide in Gaza is Britain and all across Europe and the United States. So, I mean, Ed Miliband is probably a bit of a sop to that constituency. Wes Streeting, again, another yes man, he talks well, as Martin says, so he can kind of sound plausible on TV, as he did with the BBC there the last few years. And Andy Burnham, another effect, basically a cosmetic figure that's been brought in to project some kind of like more some kind of credibility in this government that Stormer could not kind of muster, and therefore he was a danger to the policy becoming unstuck, and he had to be ejected. Burnham is brought in with a kind of a more kind of a populist kind of a ear for the people out there. He speaks kind of like a more kind of a, sort of working class kind of tone about, bus fares and, pubs, making it easier
Exactly.
to have it cheaper to have a drink and all this. I mean, it's kind of like very, it's just a cosmetic exercise. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is that these people are facilitating a more militarist
Yeah.
policy out of London that the
Yeah.
US demands, and the Zionist axis also demands. So I think this is the worry here, that to kind of save the British political institutions, their complete implosion of credibility and public trust. These people the deck chairs are being moved around to give the impression that there's something different now with this administration.
Yes.
It's more populist, it's more democratic, and things like that. But it's not. It's just these are all just very superficial images. As I said in my recent article, Andy Burnham is just window dressing in Downing Street for to
Yeah.
kind of
Uh,
to cover for the real
Finian,
policy.
I got to wind up there. I'll ask you one more question. So exactly. So
Mm.
he's putting all this populist stuff about with TikTok videos, sharing drinks with John Healey, to attract the people who might have voted Reform because they were not being listened to by SW1, that sort of thing. And then he's going to hit us with the militarism in the coming weeks after he's
Yeah,
established himself
Yes.
as a
I,
good guy who listens to the working class and their concerns about cost of living. But Finian, just before we go, just tell us something about the way that the Ukrainians and their British handlers are going to try and stitch this war together with the Iranian war, so in such a way to lock in the American support for Ukraine in the regards where it had been somewhat more withdrawn or withheld. Tell us about these
yeah.
attacks on tankers in the Caspian Sea. We've got 3 minutes
I,
left.
Pele, I don't know a lot of precise details about that attack, no more than yourself or Martin or any other listener here. All I know is that from open source reporting that Iranian commercial ship was attacked. That's what the Iranians are claiming, that it hadn't any military utility at all. Even if it did, it's none of Ukraine's business. But anyway, but I do want to say, Pele, I'll try to go back to that point that you have asked. But I do want to say, last week, or a couple of weeks ago, there was a really significant interview given by a guy called Sir Peter Ricketts, who was the National Security Advisor to various prime ministers in Britain for several cabinets, both Tory and Labour. Sir Peter Ricketts. Now he gave an interview to CNN. Anybody can look it up, and he said that in that interview that Burnham's task would be to try to sell the war in Ukraine to the British public. Because as with all countries, in North America and Europe, people are dejected or dissatisfied with this ongoing war, this massive reckless wastage of resources and taxpayers' funds. Now, so Peter Ricketts said this quite explicitly to CNN, that Burnham's task would be to sell the Ukraine war to a very skeptical and dissatisfied British public who are seeing their social conditions deteriorating rapidly. And his job is to then rationalize, or to give the Ukraine war more kind of like focus, or more justification. And that's what his job is. He's really just to give the imperialist state a facelift and a more credible, kind of position, which it doesn't have, but that's what his job is. And I think that, he's just kind of like being directed, as with all these other people, but by the deep state players. And I think the British are very much driving the Ukraine war, advising the
Agreed.
Zelensky regime with MI6. And one very plausible, kind of objective would be to try to escalate this war, to get Europe more involved, and attack, as the Ukrainians have done, attack Iranian cargo ships in the Caspian Sea. And this I think that this is the danger, that these people are being servile to the agenda to try to expand this war, both the Ukraine war and the war against Iran.
Right.
And they're
Yeah,
willing
I
to
just
do it.
want no more round of questions. We've got to wind up. They've got 30 seconds left. Thank you so much, Finian. Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you
Here,
so
here.
much myself. As I said, I just got back from the UK. I saw no appetite for war in Ukraine. Nobody mentioned it spontaneously. I saw considerable rundown of public services, a country which is in a kind of identity crisis in a way. Things look a bit shabby, down. Incomes per capita haven't increased in 15 years since 2008, but costs have increased considerably. And if they're being sold this war, then we look forward to a very intense propaganda campaign over a couple of weeks. But you'll be watching this show, I'm sure, to get the real goods on what's happening. So with people like Finian and Martin and myself, thank you so much. Come on again soon, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.